Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 series for Dr. Spotfire. My name is Neil Canungo, and I'll be your host. And wow, what a year it's already been in 2021. Now, we're going to do this session on mods. Mods is a really big release. We talked about it in our December session with an introduction to mods on doing custom visualizations. Now, that session was focused more for beginners to get to know the resources available with you for mods, all the different components of a mod, and how to just use someone else's mod, how to grab some other mod and use it in your own Spotfire analysis and in your own environment at your organization. Now, today's going to be a little bit more intermediate. We're going to talk about scripting best practices. Andrew Berridge is going to join us again today, and he's going to show just some various parts about the mod scripting experience. And at the end, he's going to talk about some best practices advice, and I'll put some timestamps for that in the video description. Next month, we're going to do an advanced session, and this is going to be using mods for non-visualization uses. It's going to be reaching outside of the mods framework into the Spotfire API to do custom actions, create animations, change UI elements, AngularJS, React, things like that. And that's going to be a more advanced session. We're going to have two Spotfire engineers join us. So that's going to be really exciting. Two engineers from Sweden. The Spotfire development team in Sweden are going to join us. Now, mods is a huge topic. There is no way we can get through everything in just these three sessions. So for transparency, I wanted to let you know that we are internally creating some resources to help you in the community. We're looking at creating a short curriculum for mods training. We're doing different modathons. You'll see some announcements for that this year, kind of hackathons for mods. We're making it a little bit easier for you to find and download mods. As we do this, any type of critical feedback you have for us is very helpful. You know, we're kind of doing this as we go. We wanted to get the mods feature out in Spotfire right away. We didn't want to wait till we had all these resources. And furthermore, we wanted to hear and observe what is most useful to you in the community. So definitely give the critical feedback, and that'll help us to make sure that you're the best enabled you can be with mods. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce today's session. This is scripting best practices with mods. We're going to start by just showing the basic of an empty mod and using all the Spotfire properties, kind of creating it from scratch. And then the second part, we're going to actually show how to incorporate a third-party library, which can be a big time saver where you can reuse visualizations that other third-party libraries have already created. And we'll finish up with some best practices advice. So let me hand it over to Andrew. Andrew, if you want to go ahead and get started.
Thanks very much, Neil. So welcome everybody and Happy New Year from me. So let me just share my screen. So last time I showed the bar chart and the error chart examples. Now these are my two favorite examples because they help explain many of the core concepts in Spotfire visualization mods. Now I'm going to talk a bit today about the data and a bit about rendering and how to do that kind of stuff in some more detail than we did last time. So if I go to the API documentation, let me just talk to you a bit about this. Data is the key to every mod, and obviously you can't do anything without data. So that's the first thing that you really need to understand in order to build a mod. So if you come to this sort of refresh and you don't know how Spotfire works with data, then I suggest you look at this page. But I want to talk a little bit about what's actually going on here. It's critical, first of all, it's critical to understand that when you send data to a mod, you don't actually send a data table to a mod, a Spotfire data table to a mod, you send a data view. Now, a data view is comprised of axes and data that corresponds to those axes. It's an aggregated data view over the data table. And that's the key thing to understand. Every visualization in Spotfire, if it's a cross table or a bar chart or something like that, has an aggregated view of the data. And that's what a mod has as well. So its content is specified as a number of axes. I went into the data view definition previously. Right now, mods can only accept a single data view, so you need to know that as well. But this is how it's defined in the mod manifest, and that describes how the data enters and works with your Spotfire visualization. In its simplest form, you can just iterate over the data. So this is the very simplest way to do it. So there's a very, this is just a simple example, just to print out the data. You'll notice in the mod examples, I think I mentioned this before, but there's a thing called await. Everything in most of the stuff in the mods API is asynchronous. So that's why you've got this await here. So you'll see that scattered around the example code, and that just means just wait for this thing to be ready, and then as soon as it's ready, do something with it. So in this case, I'm going to wait for the axes, and I'm going to get all the rows, and for each of the rows, I'm just going to return that value for each of the rows. And in this case, if we just ran that example, we'd get something that looked like this. Now that's the very, very simplest thing that you can do. Now you notice here we've got categorical continuous. So sometimes you have to deal with categorical or continuous values. So there are different ways of doing that. A data view continuous value is a very simple object that you can use to retrieve the actual value from it and get a nice formatted value. There's also categorical. So categorical could be very simple, like it's just a string value or something like that. Or it could be part of a hierarchy. So you can go and look at the documentation on that. Now, one thing that's actually pretty cool in Spotfire is that a lot of data in Spotfire is inherently hierarchical. And the way that Spotfire represents that is it groups the data together with single values for a column and all its leaves or its child values for that single value. And that's actually a very efficient way to send data to the mod. So the mods support that by default. You can imagine if you had a bar chart and you had a flat data structure like this, you might imagine that you've got you could represent it as a simple table. So you've got one row for every single value in it. But actually, that's not a very efficient way to ship the data about. It's much more efficient to split the data into hierarchy by each of the X values. So here we've got each of the X values for the order priority. Now, for some reason, it's not showing the axis labels, so let's not worry about that for now. But you can see that each of the values would be this group of bars here, and this would be the next set of hierarchy, and this would be the next hierarchy. So with that, you can get the leaf nodes from that hierarchy and explore the values within them. So let me switch back here. And this has got this shows a simple example of how to get into those hierarchies. So we have the X hierarchy, and we await the root of the X hierarchy. So that means that's the bottom of the tree of the hierarchy. So it represents the whole of the X-axis. But now we can iterate over it and look at the children within that that node. And within that, in that child, you'll have values for each of the X-axis. And in the bar chart example I was showing there, you'll have another node which would be each of those bars that you wish to render. So you could see the values of each of those bars. If I transformed it to a stacked bar chart, then obviously we'll only have one value per X value. We'll only have one node per X value at that level. So you'll be able to look at the stacked bar chart, the values of that. So if we go across to the bar chart example, you'll see this is a practical example of how that works. So we're rendering a stacked bar, for example, and this is the node for the item on the X-axis, and these are the rows that correspond to that node. So this code here just sums up all the values for those rows, and works out the height for it, and renders that bar. There's a bit more to it, but that's the basic paradigm. Now, there a lot of people say, okay, so we demonstrate, we build this mod visualization, or how do we do things like marking? So, we talked about consuming the data. The next thing you need to do, let me just park that for a second and just go on to rendering. The next thing you need to do is render that that mod. So the normal way to do that is to make sure, and I'm sure I covered this before, but the main thing to do that is to render into some kind of div or something like that on your web page. So if I go to this other example, which I'm perhaps more familiar with, we can render to that div. So excuse me, there's quite a lot of code here. So if I go here, actually, I remembered, right. So here is in the index HTML page for this example, you'll see there's this mod container. So that's where the actual visualization will be rendered into. Now, as I worked with the bar chart value example, let me go back again just a second. I wanted to talk a little bit about marking. So this is a very simple example of how marking can be done. If I can even type. I have indeed, it's the wrong, I've gone to the wrong one, apologies. Right, okay, here we go. It's the problem with trying to do too many things at once. Okay, mark. Okay, so marking is obviously necessary for any Spotfire visualization. Now, if I were to, in a standard Spotfire visualization, if I were to have a bar chart or something like that, if I were to click and drag, obviously that would mark, something's gone wrong here. As I was to mark it, I would click and drag, and it would mark all the bars underneath that. For the purpose of a very simple example, actually the easiest thing to do is add some kind of click handler to each of the bars, and then mark those. And that can often be more appropriate for certain types of visualization, and a really simple way to implement it. So if I go here, we just have an on-click handler for each of those bars and each of the segments within the bars. This is a stack bar chart example here, so render a stack bar. And so here you can see how the marking operation is performed. The area chart's perhaps a bit more complex because it does support a marking rectangle. So if you're interested in learning how marking works in more detail, I would go into the area chart code and see how that's implemented. Basic paradigm is you need to know under where the user has clicked and dragged, and then mark those rows in the underlying data view. So that's useful to know as well.
We have a question about the rendering to a div. Is the mod always rendered to one div regardless of the JavaScript framework you use?
No, that's an excellent question. Although I haven't explored it, it is certainly possible to render different parts of the visualization to different divs. So you can think of a div as a container. So if I go back to the area chart, I do keep swapping between these examples because I find they do demonstrate different concepts quite well. So here we have the HTML page, which this HTML page defines the page into which the model will be rendered. Just think of it as any other web browser. And a div is a container for anything you want to put in it. So you could very well and very easily create another one slash div, and then within my JavaScript code, I can render different parts of the visualization to different containers. It would also be possible to dynamically add those divs. Let's say you wanted to develop, for example, a trellis visualization. And you can think of a trellis visualization as just several copies of the same visualization divided up by different subsets of the data. So you could, using JavaScript, programmatically add more divs to your HTML and render each of those visualizations to those divs, and then you could use some kind of flow layout, some nice HTML flow layout thing like Bootstrap or something like that to handle the layout for you. Go and look
So
up Bootstrap if you're interested in that.
So just to clarify that, it's you're not actually trellising, but you can kind of create different compartments, like just like a trellis does, but you're not really
Yes.
using the Spotfire trellising. You're, I was actually thinking of doing a mod for an upgraded kind of KPI chart. Would that be something that you would use this way, or would you still put that all
Yeah.
in one div?
No, absolutely, because the more code reuse you can do, the better.
Hmm.
Right. So you could write a piece of code that renders a KPI tile,
Hmm.
and then you could render that into multiple divs, one div per tile, and you could just build up those divs programmatically and just use that single piece of functionality to do that, rather than write another tile and another tile and another tile into that div. And then you can take advantage of these modern layout things, like I said, the Bootstrap. You can. We've had some great success with Bootstrap in other projects. It's a very nice way of laying out elements on an HTML page.
Okay, thanks.
So that would be ideal. Yeah. So you need to, if you're thinking about doing trellising, you kind of need to simulate trellising by by creating separate copies of the visualization to do that. I believe there is one example that does it already. There's like perhaps there's a gauges example or something. I don't recall exactly,
Yeah.
but
So now might
I'll do it.
this be useful if within separate divs you could have entirely different charts, but it would be one visualization mod. So one
Yes.
visualization could have different visualizations within it, and the way you would do that would
Exactly.
be different divs, right?
Different divs, yeah. So yes, exactly. So you could you could have a mod that is like a single dashboard, as you will, and you just add that, and it's got all these different visualizations that show different parts of that data view.
That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Uh, we are new to this ourselves, so we're exploring all these things. So it's a good discussion.
That's an interesting thought on even building a template for a specific use case that uses a particular data structure over and over.
Yeah,
You could have that is an interesting thought to have a whole dashboard that's all in a mod with various visualizations. And
yeah, exactly. I can see a lot of use cases for that.
we
Okay,
have
well, we have another.
a couple other questions, but I want to let you continue where you were. You were talking about markings, and I'll let you come back to that, and we can get to some of these other questions. The
Yeah,
next.
it's okay. I mean, I think we can answer Kevin's question, which is some of the questions discussed here. Click to mark, for example, are pretty basic Spotfire functionalities, for example.
Hmm.
I think it it's an excellent idea to have some boilerplate. So should I answer? Actually, sorry, Neil. Should I actually read out the question because I
Yeah,
don't.
yeah. So Kevin was just asking, there's a lot of basic functionality that are kind of reused. So, kind of click to mark as an example. And so Kevin was wondering, are there plans to add libraries that can be incorporated into mods so these don't have to be coded manually every time?
Yeah,
Big
absolutely.
code blocks and libraries. Yeah. Hmm.
I think what we'll find is that there's a lot of common boilerplate code that is used for different things and different visualizations. So I can definitely see utility for creating a library of functions and things that can be added to the mods, and I think it's a great idea. So we can take it up at our next internal meeting on the topic,
Yeah.
on the mods topic. So that's a fantastic suggestion. Because we hate having to rewrite stuff that we don't have to. So that's a fantastic idea. I would say that. Okay, now the other thing I wanted to talk about as part of this also, as I spotted it earlier in the code when I was perusing it, is around styling. So let me see if I can find it again. It's also possible to get other metadata and styling into your mod. Now, I've lost the actual reference to it because there's quite a lot of code in here. But if we look at, I think it's called styling, or here we go, that's it. Okay, so within the mod, it's possible to get the styling from the render context. So the render context just tells you it's all the stuff that surrounds the mod. It's the kind of the container, the guts of what the mod is running inside. So with this styling, you can actually it's just essentially CSS. So with this styling, if I do view references, you can see there's loads of references to this in the area chart. So it's quite cool that I can go back to Spotfire and do things like canvas styling, edit custom theme, and you'll notice here visualization scales. I can do something very silly like choose some really weird font, and you'll see that my visualization, all the fonts change to show that. That's implemented in these charts as well. So if you want to know how that works, go and have a look at those. But styling is one of the last things I generally tend to look at, but it's very important if you're building a visualization that has to fit within your own company's custom branding and that kind of stuff. So that's another good thing to look out for. Okay, so the other thing I wanted to do, I've touched on it very, very briefly last time, is I wanted to talk about developing D3 visualizations in a Spotfire mod. For the uninitiated, D3JS, let me just bring it up. D3JS is data-driven documents, and it's definitely my go-to tool whenever I'm developing a mod.
So this is a library of JavaScript visualizations, and it's one of many libraries out there.
Yeah, it is. It is. You don't have to use D3. You can use. We've had lots of experience and success with Plotly, for example, Plotly or high charts or anything like that. I think they go in order of low level to high level. So if I go Plotly.js, that's an example. I'm not advertising these, by the way. I'm just saying you can. So you can use any of these visualization libraries. Now I've loaded all these into my browser. If you go from the left to the right in these tabs, I would say that each one of them goes from low level to high level coding. So with high charts, you get a visualization, and you can just say I want a bar chart, and you can get a bar chart, or I want a line chart, and you just say give me a line chart, and that's how high chart works. Plotly's a bit lower level than that, so you've got a bit more control over what you can do. It's actually based on D3. So if I go back to D3, D3 is the lowest level. I tend to go towards D3 because I find that whenever I develop a visualization, I get a lot of additional requirements that say, well, can you add a little widget here or a little button here or an additional visual element there? And that's why I go to D3, because I've got a lot of control over what that does. D3 is basically a library for drawing things or plotting things in the web browser. There is a caveat with that. If you want to do to create a fully functional visualization that's practical and that does everything you want, then doing stuff in D3 can take an additional while, and it takes a little while to understand it. It's actually it's a kind of declarative paradigm, and I'll explain that. So don't worry. Certainly I was brought up as a procedural or programmatic developer. So that means I think in terms of for loops and functions and while loops and all that kind of stuff. D3 is much more declarative. So rather than saying okay, so I've got all these elements in my HTML page. I want to iterate over them. I just write something like this, which says what I want to do. So rather than doing all these for each and for loops and all that kind of stuff, you can just say with every paragraph I want to do this. And in this case, what this is doing is applying a style, a color to each of the paragraph objects in my HTML document. So it's kind of like saying what you want to do rather than how you want to do it. And that can actually give some pretty nice and succinct code that just works on it. Perhaps I don't want to go into this into too much detail because there's not time for it, but perhaps the most complex part of D3 is this, which is enter and exit. And that can take a while to understand. But that's all you need to think about of this is what do you do when you get new data and what do you do when data goes away. So if you're doing an advanced D3 visualization, then you need to take into account what happens when the user adjusts the filters in Spotfire. Because if I take out data, then some data comes out of my visualization. How do I want to render that? Do I need to remove those elements from the visualization and things like that? But that's really an advanced topic that takes some getting used to, but it's useful to know that it exists. Things
Yeah, I
like
think there's
property and head charts make it easier.
there are a ton of resources out there on D3 and tutorials. There's books, there's free books, free courses. But I think one of the key things that's not out there that we want to introduce is how do you integrate that with Spotfire? How do you
Yeah,
take these open framework or these open libraries and put it connected with Spotfire?
yeah, absolutely,
Maybe that
absolutely.
area chart might the area chart example has D3 in it, does it
It
not?
does.
Or yeah, it might
Yeah,
be.
it does. So I was going to talk about that in a second. What I found with D3, it's not been up there that long. Is they've got this thing here as well. That's useful. It's called observable, and you can actually write code in line in a notebook, so that you can use that to explore how it works without having to get into Spotfire, and then you can, then you can embed that in Spotfire. So I'd take a look at this. Um, you
That'd
know,
be a good way to kind of test things out
yeah, it's a really good way to test things out.
before
Yeah,
yeah, if you're customizing things before bringing it to Spotfire. Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, yeah. Right, and so I want to talk about this in a little more detail. So, in terms of using a D3 visualization or anything that uses a big library that you want to bring in the source code, you want to use that. So I talked last time, I think I mentioned React. I've used mods to create a React um, advanced user interface, and I use this paradigm to do it. I use it to bring D3JS into the mod or any other library. And this I'm looking at the wrong one. The area chart is the framework that you need to do that to use that. So I'll talk about that in a little bit of detail because I only touched on it very briefly last time. So it has within this example, what we're doing is we're making use of something called Webpack. Now, Webpack can take, with various plugins, it can take code from different libraries, or it can take TypeScript. So people might want to develop in TypeScript, for example. For those that don't know, TypeScript is a strongly typed version, kind of like I want to get this, I might not get this quite right, but it's kind of like a strongly typed version of JavaScript. When you're developing in pure JavaScript, you only have variables. They're not strongly typed. They're not ints. They're not strings. They're not anything like that. So that can lead to confusion. And it can also lead to bugs and also all sorts of other things if you're not careful. So you might want to explore TypeScript. There is a TypeScript example in the. There's at least one TypeScript example in the in the examples with mods. The thing is that browsers don't understand TypeScript. They only understand JavaScript. And browsers don't know about D3, you have to bring in D3 in some way. So what Webpack does is allow you to transpile any libraries or JavaScript, TypeScript, or anything like that into pure JavaScript that the browser can understand. So this example, I went through it last time, but you can run Webpack on it. It's just a task, show all tasks. npm build watch will run Webpack and watch for any changes if I make any changes, and automatically compile them. And it compiles everything into this dist folder here. So you can see here, this is the bundled up JavaScript that contains D3 and the area chart. So that's all in here. You don't need to refer to this, but this is what the Spotfire web browser sees. It doesn't see my raw source code. It sees this bundle, and you can see that within the mod manifest. So if I look here, it's actually sending bundle.js to Spotfire, not index.js. So that's important to understand whenever you work with these kind of things. If you want to install another package, you can just use npm to do that. I'm going to do that now, and I can do save -save dev, because React is a development dependency. So I'm going to use React to develop in this case. So I can just go -save dev, and that's going to install React into Visual Studio Code, into my folders for Visual Studio Code, and make it ready for use. And then if I go to package.json, you should see we've got React as a dev dependency. Now, I didn't have to do that. Visual Studio Code is very kind and just adds it as a dev dependency, and that means that if I were to ship this to somebody else, they could just install all the packages and they get React by default. And then that's really all you need to do. You're ready to use that framework. And so the same would have been done here with D3. So npm install D3 -save dev. And so that would have installed D3 and put the right thing into the package.json. So that would just work. And then, as I said, it all gets bundled into this bundle.js. So if you see some cool library that you want to use, just see if you've got there's a node package for it, install that, and go ahead and start using it.
So now that this isn't your bundle.js, do you call it from the main CSS? Is that what's different now? Or the mod manifest? How do you start using it?
Yeah, so all my JavaScript that is in this source folder will be bundled up into a single JS file. Okay, so I don't need to do anything else. I can add more JavaScript files in here. I can do whatever we like, and then it just all gets bundled with Webpack and distributed in this bundle.js. Does that make sense now?
It does, yeah.
Okay. And obviously the main.css is supplied with that. That's my styling and all that kind of stuff. So that's all supplied with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes it very easy to include external libraries and get developing with them.
And this is now different this is kind of a different structure than your other mod where you weren't using a library, right? So now this is...
That's right.
Yeah.
So the bar chart doesn't have,
a dist folder.
Doesn't have a dist folder. It doesn't use Webpack. If I look at the package.json, the only dependency it's got is this live server, which is the lightweight web server we use to serve the mod. So it doesn't have anything like that in it. And it's just a very, very basic example that shows how to render things. And each of the rendering's just done as divs, basically. So or SVG. I can't remember which, divs or SVGs, but you can always do, and this is what I've done before, but you can always go to the developer tools these developer tools, you'll use them all the time when developing a mod. But I can always just go here and explore how it's been done, and go back here, and it's a div, and that shows how it
Great. Yeah.
how it works and how it's rendered into the into Spotfire. Okay, we don't have it.
Yeah, I was wondering. So, let's kind of close some closing things here. I think we should do a couple comments on security and signing. We might just need to point to some other resources on that, given the time. But
Yeah,
um, before
absolutely.
we close out that, sorry, were you going into? Did you have another topic you wanted to go over
No, I
there?
was going to talk about signing, but we do have another question, so we could answer that one.
Yeah, I was also wondering if you could just kind of high level give some best practice kind of guidance. What are some tips and advice that you would give to those of us new to developing mods, new to JavaScript? Would you recommend starting, for instance, starting with a library? Would you recommend, starting from another mod example? And how do you structure your code? What are some of your thought process type advice?
Sure, sure. Well, that's a very interesting topic, Neil. I think that, I mean, this documentation talks about how to start developing a mod, and it does say start from a mod example, and that's what I would do, and I would follow this kind of paradigm. So the bar chart really is the go-to, and that would be what you would do. Um, there's also the starter project, which is just basically an empty container. But the way I work, and I suspect a lot of people work, is that they don't really like starting with a blank slate. It can be a little daunting, I suppose, to start with a blank slate. You don't know what to do, and you don't know how to code things. So what I do is just tend to take an existing example and pick it all apart and take out the bits that I don't want, and then build up from there. I think that's really the way to do it. And although I've got quite a bit of experience with JavaScript, I still do that. I think it's the best way to go.
And I think that helps because it creates a standard for all of the mods that you and your colleagues might be developing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And really, the bar chart is intended to just get you started with something very, very basic. But really, the area chart is an example of what I would call best practice. So that shows how to create a practical visualization that works. It's got styling, it's got error handling, it's got marking, it's got, so I would start off with the bar chart and throw few things in there to get started and see how what you do changes what you look at. But then when you want to develop a practical example, you could look at that one, or another of the examples that uses that particular library that you wish to use.
Would you mind showing us a little bit of example on just the error handling and just show us where that is in the
Yeah, sure,
area chart,
sure.
just so we can see where to look and
Yeah.
what to observe?
Um, right. So
Sorry if I put you on the spot there on something.
that's cool, Neil. I don't mind at all. So in this function, what it's going to try and do is render the visualization. Now, this is perhaps not this. You can catch errors that you're not expecting. So this basically just catches everything. So it tries to render the visualization, and then if something goes wrong in the JavaScript, you'll get this error message. What it does is, well, probably I don't need to go into the technical details too much,
Yeah,
but
I
you
wouldn't
can
want to
look
go
at this.
too much details. This is basically a try catch that's looking for
It's a
certain
try catch.
conditions. And
Yeah, but there's also other things that this does. If you've got too many rows, I can't remember exactly where it is, but um, there is a thing.
For a row
Error.
limit, right? It's
Yeah.
what, 2,500 or something, or
Yes, because you could do something very stupid. Um, is it in here? Error overlay. Let me just see. There we go. There's the code that does that. So if you did something very, very silly, like, well, we've got the color here. So if I did something very silly, like order date. No, that's not got enough values in it.
I
Order
think
ID, maybe.
it hierarchied it by year. So if you there you go. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, that wasn't exactly what I was expecting, but that kind of thing. So, there are. I was expecting something slightly different from that, but this is what's happening when you put me on the spot. This is cool. This is fine. This is no problem. This is no problem at all. Um, maybe that might do it as well. No, okay. Well, they might have restyled it since I last looked at it. I was expecting something that looked a bit different, but yeah, there we go. That was
It's right.
that
It's
was
right.
that, that was right. Yeah, that was
Yeah.
right. Yeah, okay. Okay, so here's where I'm capture where this area chart captures a known error that we know might happen, and it's trying to give a nice message to the user to say, you've done something silly, or this is wrong. It's not a programmatic error. It's a don't be silly, don't do this kind of error. So this is how that works, and basically it's putting an error into this error overlay, and that's being shown. And I believe that's, again, I think this is the latest version of the API. It's showing that, and it's a way to do standardized error handling within the mod.
Now, so it's interesting to me that there's a row count cap that's been built into this. Um, I've wondered, how do you determine where you should set that cap? Is there any type of way to measure performance of your mod? Is there any general rule of thumb that you keep in your mind? I've actually gone through this mod and I increased the row size limit to, I think, like 10 million, and it
Yes.
worked. The area chart worked just fine, and
Yeah, it does.
I was a little hesitant when I was doing it because I was like, well, someone set a limit for a reason, and I don't understand that reason. Do
Hmm.
you? Yeah, how do you think about it, or what are some advice you have on performance and where to set error handling, things of that nature?
Okay. What I think you've got to bear in mind is that for every single thing that you render into the mod, you're using up memory in the web browser, and you're doing things in the web browser, and you're asking the web browser to calculate something. It's Web browsers aren't designed for rendering large numbers of those SVGs or whatever. SVG is a graphical element within a web browser. They're not designed for rendering millions and millions of those. So you kind of have to think to yourself, well, is there a way of combining things so I'm not rendering so many of them, or is there a way that I can hide the ones that I don't need to see at the moment, and things like that? So you can do that. There's no real rule of thumb. It's just basically what's practical. Um, and I've done a lot of work on this on another visualization that I worked on, whereby the example that was on D3, the D3 websites, just rendered everything, and I found it performed very badly. So probably, as I think about this, probably what I would suggest is that before going too far down the road of developing everything, getting everything perfect, implementing all your marking logic, all your rendering, all your styling, all those kind of things, and then you've just been working on a tiny data sample of your data just because that's all you have. What I would do very early on in the development process is send a data sample of the same sort of size and magnitude that you're going to eventually end up viewing, because
Yeah.
that will immediately tell you whether you've got a problem or not.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can look at that problem. And there are many ways to mitigate that. Just think, well, does the browser really need to render this right now? Do I really need to, for example, with D3, you can move things around the web browser and rescale them and size them and all those kind of things. So do I need to rescale that at that time? Do I need to
Gotcha.
show that at that time? So
We had a question.
questions.
We maybe should have. I think we talked about this last time, but we maybe should have touched on this to start today. What are the major components to keep in mind while building a D3 or JS chart, like package.json, index.js, other dependent files? I noticed, kind of related to this, there was some error handling in index.js, and now there's some error handling in render.js. And maybe, from a 10,000 foot view, you can discuss the purpose of each of these component files. Maybe not each of them, but the major ones. Just touch on that. I think we talked about it last time, but we can just revisit that quickly.
Yeah, well, you don't really need to know about what all those files do in order to develop a mod. I would say that as you start to develop from an example, you'll become familiar with those, and just use the layout of the examples, which will just work. I was just showing package.json to tell you some of the ways that things happen under the hood. So I don't have to touch this, apart from when I just want to add some metadata about the packages and the charts and things like that. So I don't have to touch that. I've never touched this. I think that's mostly done by the examples, and whenever you add stuff, it's just that you don't have to worry about that. Webpack config you don't have to worry about, because that's all pre-built for you in this particular example. But you can think of index.html as the container for the div and just loading the Spotfire API. Index.js is your main development file where you kick everything else off. And then it's good practice.
So when you kick everything else off, sorry, is this where you're loading the data and kicking things off, or?
Yeah, it's when you're loading data, you're calling render and all those kind of things. And you don't need anything else. I mean, you can put everything into this index.js. Mm-hmm. It just becomes, if you get really into this and you start to develop a large visualization with lots of source code in it, then it's good practice to split it out into multiple files. So that's what they've done with this this error chart. It's been split out into different files different JavaScript files that do different things, just so it's more compartmentalized and you're not scrolling through 8,000, 10,000 lines of code or whatever it is. It's not even anything like that, but I'm just using that to illustrate the point. So that's good practice to divide it into modules that do different parts of it. So you think, well, I've got a problem with rendering, so I know it's going to be in here. I've got a problem with building these series, so I know it's going to be in here. And then if I go over this once more, these are all my static files, which I didn't say that earlier, I apologize. These are the static files that don't get compiled, but they're copied into here when you bundle the visualization up.
Gotcha.
Okay.
I think there's one more question. We should probably wrap up after that.
Sure.
It's just kind of a general question about how you, when you want to limit the effort of creating a mod, how do you decide whether to use something like high charts or D3, like a high level library or low level library? My guess would be to probably start with the high level, see how much you can get, and then if you need more flexibility and control, then you would go to something a little more low level, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other concerns like freenet cost and stuff like that. So things like high charts, they're not free, right? So if you do need to do something that you don't want to pay for it, then you can get started with high charts. But I think if you need to use it in production, you have to pay for it. I might not be right about that, but that's what I understood at the last time. I mean,
Mhm.
this that's what you do with that. But you can always use it to try out an idea, and that's just fine.
Yeah.
Then I would, and particularly if you're starting, then doing something like that can be a good place to start. Then, look at Plotly if you want to do something more, um, slightly more involved and more customizable. But then, D3 if you want to get into the weeds and develop something entirely custom.
Yes,
I would
D3 is like one of the most granular, most low level uh, um, libraries. But then I've seen, there's also like Vega that's built off of it.
Yeah,
Vega is a little bit simpler. It utilizes D3, but there's a lot of stuff's packaged into functions. And then there's even Vega Lite, which is another level higher than that.
yes, that's right. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned that because one of our product managers, who isn't technical at all, developed the first prototype of the area chart using Vega.
Oh, really? Yeah.
It's pretty cool.
Okay, well, let me go ahead and let me just wrap this up. I know we're over time. There's just so much to go over with mods that it's very, very difficult to get to everything. But I think that we covered a range of topics that should help people that have gotten started. Hopefully, get past any blockers. That's my hope, at least. And if not, be sure to ask questions. Our audience should be sure to ask questions on the Facebook group, Reddit, or community, TIPCO community. Next session, we're gonna go even more advanced than we went today in the past session. We're actually gonna have two of the Spotfire engineers, or Spotfire developers in Sweden, and they're gonna talk about how you can use mods to use a JavaScript framework to go beyond just visualizations, and how you can reach outside the mods framework into other parts of Spotfire, whether you want to do actions and you want to reach into document properties and perform different actions, trigger different actions. If you want to do animations, if you want to embed new UI elements, you want to bring Angular in. Andrew showed how to bring React in. So this is going to be, mods is more than just charts. The core, the primary use is for charts, but there's a lot more we can do with it. And so yeah, we're gonna have a very advanced session where some Spotfire developers are gonna talk about that. Thank you, Andrew, for your time. Thank you, all of our attendees. Our next session is going to be on February 2nd, the first Tuesday of every month at 9 a.m. Pacific. So we will catch you guys then. Thanks again
Okay.
for joining, and have a good day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Andrew. Bye.